So they're dive travel experts. Carrie Miller and Chris Taylor have traveled to 50 international locations around the world, spending more than 250 hours underwater to create a one-of-a-kind book. 250 hours. How many of you would like to do that? Yeah, right? So I don't know. So Carrie is actually already a renowned author. I don't have any of you seen or read this book. It's amazing. 100 dives of a lifetime. The photography in here is just spectacular. I'm going to leave it up here if you want to peruse it after the presentation. But so Carrie is a traveler, storyteller, award-winning writer. She has been writing for National Geographic since 1998. Her first book is The 100 Dives of a Lifetime. The world's ultimate underwater destination was published in 2019. Chris is an experienced diver with more than 1,000 dives under his weight belt. He has worked in the dive industry throughout Australia and has particular love for sharks. Their project, Beneath the Surface Media, uses storytelling and dive travel to encourage conservation through exploration. So without further ado, I will stop sharing, and Chris and Carrie, you want to take over?
We sure will. Thank you so much for having us. Let me just share my screen. And I'll share that one. There we go. So can you see that? Yeah, I can see it in the background. It's fine. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for the great introduction there. We're really happy to be here and with you guys tonight. Just bear with me. I just need to fix my screen here. Sorry. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so divers by nature are explorers, and we always enjoy speaking with fellow explorers and ocean lovers. So Chris tells us that this group has a particular yen for travel, and we just heard that in the stories from people who've traveled around the place recently, and sounds great. We've been to a few of those locations. I also dived Dream Gate cenote in Mexico as well, and yes, it is absolutely spectacular. So that was really great to hear. But what we wanted to do today is possibly, I did hear one person went to Papua New Guinea, so that's pretty off the beaten track for you guys. But we also wanted to highlight a few places that you guys might not have been, so not quite so close to home. So yeah, let's get started. So as Chris just mentioned, my name's also Chris. It's Chris Taylor. I was born in the UK, but I'm half German. So I spent most of my life there. And my parents were split up when I was very young. So I'd often spend weekends with my dad. And usually that involved me getting up really, really early in the morning as a little kid and putting a video into the VCR and watching that. And then one morning I decided when I was around 5 years old, it'd be a good idea to put Jaws on. Now, for a 5-year-old, not the greatest idea, and it absolutely terrified me, made me terrified of, absolutely ridiculously scared of sharks, unfortunately. And then as a child, also, I traveled a lot with my mother, who's German, and we spent a lot of time in Greece. And I started to learn to snorkel in Greece, or was trying to learn to snorkel in Greece, but I was so scared of sharks, so I just couldn't do it. And but my mother was quite smart. She gave me all sorts of books about sharks, so I just kept on reading more and more and more about sharks and became absolutely fascinated with them. So fast forward to 2010, I moved to Byron Bay, Australia, which is where we now live, and learned to dive. I worked here in Byron for a couple of years in the industry at a local dive shop. And then I've worked throughout Australia and New Zealand. Eventually, though, I moved to South Australia and I took up the role of dive supervisor for Rodney Fox Shark Expeditions. And this is me here with the white sharks. So I've done more than 300 dives just with white sharks alone, but I could easily do 1,000 more. They're incredible animals. For anybody who's ever wanted to go and see great whites, this is the place to do it. And this is also where I met Carrie. So she was on assignment for National Geographic. We always like to joke that sharks brought us together. And when we got married, we went back on our honeymoon and then did this mock-up wedding picture in the cage, which my former boss was kind enough to take a photo of. It's very, very cold here, by the way. It would have been roughly 16 degrees Celsius. So I don't know what that is, but that's probably under 60 degrees Fahrenheit there. So it was very cold in just a t-shirt and Carrie's very light dress. Yeah.
So, hi everybody, my name is Carrie Miller, and I've been a professional writer since 1998, primarily for National Geographic. Writing for Nat Geo is pretty much the only thing I wanted to do since I was 9 years old. I started out as a researcher, and that was a phenomenal education because this was old school stuff. When I started at National Geographic, this is before social media, it's before Google. People were still using landlines, widespread email addresses, and cell phones weren't really a thing. And to this day, when you write a story for National Geographic, every time that you state a fact, you have to have at least 2 verified sources for that fact. And then the researcher or fact checker will also then not only check your sources, but then they have to come up with 2 or 3 verified sources as well. So in the days before Google and cell phones and email addresses, this was quite tricky. It often involved staying up in the middle of the night to call different locations, and using a lot of ingenuity. So for example, if a writer had written in a story that there was a farmer in Greece that had 7 goats, I'd have to stay up in the middle of the night, call the local taverna where the farmer might be going on a Thursday night, try to find someone to translate, and find out that the farmer now in fact has 5 goats because 2 sadly died last year. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Farmer. And then that's how we did research back then. So it was definitely a really good education for what we're doing now. Eventually I graduated to assignments, and with assignments, I dug these out because they're kind of fun. You were always issued 2 books back in the day. The first was a little yellow medical book that stated all of your vaccinations for your assignments to make sure that you are staying safe. The National Geographic actually has a doctor's office in their basement to prep you for assignments and to patch you up when you get back. The other book was a little blue expense book, which is now kind of turned gray with age. This is just standard expense book where you have, you write down what your expenses were and then couple them with receipts if you were lucky enough to get receipts. But I kept this because I always thought of a story that I heard that happened a few years before I started at Nat Geo. There was a female photographer who was nearly abducted by a Bedouin chief in Jordan, and her assistant had to ransom her for 34 camels. And I always wondered what that looked like in the little blue expense book, 35 camels to get Jody back and no receipt. So anyways, it was a great time to be a part of National Geographic and a great way to get started in the industry. And it really gave us the basis for this book. So if you take Chris's diving expertise and my travel and storytelling expertise, you get National Geographic's A Diver's Guide to the World, remarkable dive travel destinations above and beneath the surface.
Love it.
Our book's a different kind of guidebook. So it's not your standard deep dive kind of guidebook, pun intended. It features 50 extraordinary destinations around the world for divers who like to travel and travelers with an interest in the underwater world. Like Chris already mentioned before, to create the book, we traveled to 50 locations in 35 countries over 14 continuous months and spent more than 250 hours underwater. Each destination is its own chapter, including a general overview of the location, a few land-based activities, diving information, and then a page of specifics. For example, travel information, a dive overview, including marine life, recommended shops, insider tips, your standard kind of information that you would get from a guidebook. It's not a complete guide by any means. We never meant it to be one. So we don't want to write the joy out of exploration. we want you to dive in and experience things like this for yourself. So I'm sure many of you have been to Hawaii. This is a green turtle getting cleaned at a cleaning station and having the algae eaten off its shell. This is just north of Kona, a place called Kohala. Very lovely little dive, and for the few new divers that just got up, and the lady who's just doing her dive course right now, congratulations, good luck, and welcome to a wonderful world. This is the kind of place where you should probably think about going early on. Very easy dive, really nice, clear water, nice and warm, and wonderful animals like this.
So the idea for this book began quite organically. When Chris and I first met, Chris was a mad keen diver, and although I've always been a water baby and a snorkeler, I wasn't a diver yet. So when we traveled together, he'd spend half the day underwater, and then I do something on land. So for example, here I am riding a horse through mangroves in Vanuatu, which was pretty spectacular, and Chris was off diving the wrecks. And then we'd get together for lunch and we'd talk about all these adventures that we had and what we had seen and done. And we were both green with envy and felt like we missed out on something spectacular. And we also started to see the connection between the land and the sea and the places we were visiting. So whatever is happening on land, geography, environmental health, history, culture, it's mirrored underwater. And by experiencing both of them together, it gives us a deeper insight into the place we're visiting. And that's what dive travel or ocean travel is all about. It's the complete picture. It's the best of both worlds.
So we selected our destinations based on two main criteria. First of all, the place had to have a mix of land and ocean activities. That's why there's a few places in there that you would, or a few places missing in there that you would expect to be in this kind of a book, but weren't in there, because yes, they have absolutely spectacular diving, absolutely incredible, but they're missing the land component, or a lot of really good diving is on liverboards, and that's why we don't really feature any liverboards in this book, just because it doesn't have that nice mix that we needed. The second criteria is the destination needs to be trying to do the right thing by the environment. So think caretaker rather than profiteer. Even if they're not getting it just right yet, that wasn't the main thing. It didn't need to already be this perfect destination. It needed to be a destination trying to change to being a better steward of our planet. From there, we had a short list, which we whittled down to 50 places. That was pretty hard to do, actually, based on geographical spread and what was feasible travel-wise. So we decided very early on that the only way to do this was to go in one direction around the world, and just continue traveling that way. Otherwise, we would have been flying back and forth too many long-distance flights and things. So we traveled in one direction all the way around. And so, yeah, so obviously the book still has some expected destinations that you guys have probably been to, like the Florida Keys, Mexico, but also some unexpected ones, like fantastic South Pacific island of Niue.
So Niue is about a 3.5-hour flight northeast of New Zealand. It's kind of near Tonga. It's one of the world's smallest countries, and it's situated on one of the world's largest raised coral atolls. And Niue was a complete surprise. It's an ideal place for self-exploration, such as hiking and biking. There aren't many beaches, but there are plenty of chasms and coves that are simply breathtaking. There's even an oasis. This is Togo Chasm, which is a sandy spot with palm trees surrounded by these big walls of limestone, and it's accessed via a ladder. Niue is also punching above its weight conservation-wise. It's the first country to become a dark sky sanctuary, protecting the night sky. It's protected the largest remaining forest area, which covers about 23% of the island. And it's also established an enormous marine park, which constitutes about 40% of the country's exclusive economic zone. Diving-wise, the underwater landscape, as you'd expect, mimics the topside. It's fantastic visibility, twisted rock formations, caverns and coves to explore. There's also a very healthy population of endemic sea snakes. And if you're diving the areas surrounding the island, you'll see plenty. They're very beautiful creatures to share the water with, very placid, curious, and gentle. If you venture into some of the ancient caves, you're going to see plenty more sea snakes. The sea snakes use the caves to come into and lay their eggs. And this is a place called Dome Cave. You swim in through this very large archway, and then there's a tunnel that goes on, and then you surface in this open chamber, and it's filled with fluted columns and stalactites. It's also filled with sea snakes, as you can see, which is slightly disconcerting because they're everywhere, and there is no avoiding bumping into them. I accidentally stepped on one and had it swim up my leg, very gently letting me know that it was there, and I removed my fin from its tail. I even saw one swim through Chris's BCD, like a scene out of Indiana Jones. It went in through one armhole and out the other before I could get his attention and let him know that he had a sea snake in his BCD.
Alaska is another place that maybe some of you guys have dived, but maybe not, even though it's close to home. It's one of those places that's off the beaten dive track. This is Ravencroft Lodge, a rustic oceanside encampment on the Port Fidalgo arm of Prince William Sound. It's not too far. It's about 5 hours boat ride from Valdez. It caters to both divers and fishermen, and from this porch here, you can actually see black bears, grizzly bears, bald eagles, and hummingbirds. So it's pretty cool. You just sit there and watch them in the distance. There's a sloping rock wall right in front of the lodge that's home to rockfish and crabs, as well as pulmos and anemones. I can't say anemones. Sorry, I'm useless at that word. So yeah, lots of those, which is really quite special. There's a lot of special cold water endemic species. But then you also get Pacific octopus, like this one that's very hard to see. Unfortunately, I don't know where I'm pointing on the screen. So, but yeah, you can just about see it blend in. Really cool little octopus. And then you also get lion's mane and moon jellyfish out there, which we lit up with some ultraviolet light to get these really cool effects here. But there's also elusive Pacific sleeper sharks that come up in the channel that will come up close enough to the surface to actually see. And then also this is the only place where you can reliably see salmon sharks, which are, for those that don't know, they're like a mini great white shark. So if you're lucky enough to see them, that's great. We were there at the right time of year, but unfortunately they decided 10 days before we got there that they disappear, and they weren't there while we were. It's very sad. One of those things with nature, you can plan as much as you like, but you can never guarantee it. But this is also the first place that I've ever had to dive with bear spray in my dive gear. So that was a first for me. Really interesting kind of dive gear there. And then Carrie and one of the guides had to take up positions on a log with a shotgun and bear spray and be bear spotters and sit there shouting, "Hey bear," while the guide and I jumped into the river and dove with some spawning salmon, which was a mind-blowing experience actually to do. So we're in a very shallow spot here, as you can see. It's quite a fast-moving river, so we're grabbing onto the rocks at the bottom. It's only about 4 feet of depth. You can see on my video it says everything in metric. But yeah, it's about 4 feet of depth, and 12 degrees is about 53 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's yeah, pretty chilly. But we were just surrounded by thousands and thousands of spawning salmon, and it's such an amazing thing to be in the river at the end of this huge migration that the salmon do. And just to see the determination of these fish swimming upstream, yeah, to spawn is incredible. It's incredible. But one major thing here, even with all these things with the shotgun and the bear spray and all of that, is these are actually, everything in our book is actually something that you can actually do if you want to. You can replicate these things. These aren't experiences that you only get to do because you wave around your National Geographic flag. Everything in the book, anyone can do. So we didn't receive or ask for special treatment in any way while we're doing the field work. It was really important when I spoke to the dive shops. They would ask me, "What do you want to see? How much camera gear have you got?" All these kinds of things. And I had to point out that we are National Geographic's only amateur photographers. So we were only traveling with a small camera. In this case, for underwater shots, I was traveling with a Paralens camera, if any of you have ever heard of it.
Rather like a GoPro.
Yeah, so a very small camera. Yeah, so I would talk to the dive shop, and I would say to them, no, we just want to do what anybody else could do. So I just want to do your average dive trip that's going out today to your average dive site that you're doing on this day that you can do because of weather. So there was no hanging around for weeks on end to get that particular moment or to get to that particular site. Everything can be done as a normal person would do if they turned up somewhere to go dive. I dove almost every destination. There were 2 destinations that unfortunately I couldn't dive. One was North Carolina because we got weathered out for the week we were there. So we were at the Outer Banks, and I wanted to dive some of the wrecks with the sand tiger sharks that I'm sure you guys have done, being so close to that. And then the other place was Taiwan, where we both unfortunately landed and came down with really bad colds. So we just couldn't, I tried to do one dive, but I just couldn't descend. I was too clogged up. And so we just had to give that a miss, which was a massive shame. But in those 2 places, and we do say in the book that we did not dive those 2 places. So we're absolutely clear about that in the book. We don't pretend we did. We did all the research we could. We spoke to the locals, spoke to the dive shops, spoke to as many people as possible, and yeah, did the research on the ground with the locals. So yeah, it's the second best kind of research that we could do other than experiencing it ourselves. But the other thing is as well, as a new diver, because Carrie only actually learned to dive just before we went on the trip. Carrie dove all the destinations that were suitable for her at the time, and in some places she massively pushed her limits and became a really, really good diver because of it. She's really well equipped to talk to those places that are really good for new divers, because as an experienced diver, we often say, oh yeah, that was an easy dive. But that may not be the case for a new diver. A new diver experiencing that place may not experience that as an easy dive. I can think of the cenotes, for example. The cenotes are often very, very easy to dive. They're very clear. There's no current in a lot of them. It's nice warm water. So they seem very easy to dive. And for anybody who's a bit experienced like me, they were a piece of cake. The ones that I did, obviously not the deep penetration dives. They were a piece of cake for me, but that doesn't mean for a brand new diver they would also be a piece of cake, because they are very imposing. They're very enclosed, and it does feel like you're in a very deep, dark hole at times. So it's one of those things where I think experienced divers often make the mistake saying that to a new diver, hey, this is super easy, you'll be able to do it, but the new diver may actually struggle. So we also have a section for new divers, because as a new diver, for those of you in the audience who are new, it can be a bit daunting traveling and going to a new place and diving with a dive shop that you've never dived with. And sometimes you don't know what questions to ask. And it's really important sometimes if you go into a dive shop and your gut feeling is, hey, something doesn't feel right here and I'm not comfortable with these guys, don't dive with them. The number one thing with diving that's really important for safety and for enjoyment is you need to feel comfortable doing that dive at the time. If you feel uncomfortable in any way, it can get dangerous really quickly, and it's no fun. It's not fun going on a dive that you're not comfortable with and you're stressing out. It's just, yeah, not great.
So we spoke with hundreds of guides, and we've got my own experience, and we put all that information in the book, both in the New Diver resources, where we talk about what questions you might want to ask, what things to look for, things to be aware of, things guides wish that you were aware of, or things that they wish that you would do as a new diver. And then we flagged places that are good for new divers or inexperienced divers or dive buddies that are at a different level, like Chris and myself. So it's suitable for people who have a lot of experience, but also suitable for people who don't have a lot of experience. And we think that that's something that really sets our book apart, because most dive guides and dive information is written for people who with experienced divers in mind. So I've always been a snorkeler, and I've always had a strong love of nature and wild places, but it was learning to scuba dive that made my world so much bigger, and it kicked my conservation awareness into overdrive. And this is something that astronauts called the overview effect. They report feeling awed and overwhelmed when seeing the beauty and fragility of our planet from the inhospitable reaches of space. And I experienced something similar when I learned to dive. It gifted me a new perspective. I saw bustling coral cities. I locked eyes with manta rays and sharks and clownfish. Every dive is like a nature hike offering up something different, and it's never to be repeated. And it's so important that we see the sea. Scuba divers are natural ambassadors for the oceans, but they aren't the only ones. Snorkelers, surfers, kayakers, even people dipping their toes into water on holiday. We can all be ocean stewards, and we need as many of them as we can get. So a few ocean facts for you. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet. Right now, less than 3% of the ocean is highly protected. Experts agree we need to protect at least 30% to safeguard marine ecosystems, which in turn will protect our own health and well-being. The ocean supplies more than half of our oxygen. It absorbs carbon dioxide, regulates our climate, and supports much of the world's economy. We need it a lot more than it needs us.
So during our 14 months on the road, we had the privilege, obviously, traveling permanently, of seeing the world in a snapshot of time. Not many people get to visit all these different destinations in all these geographic regions in such a short period of time. So it's a very unique situation that we were doing. But what we saw was staggering. So people often ask us if we saw the beginnings of climate change, and our answer is no, we saw it in full flood. So it's happening right now, and it's happening everywhere. Every place we visited has changed drastically in the past 5 years. Weather patterns are shifting, species are migrating, and everywhere there's degradation and rivers of plastic. These beautiful beaches in this video are on the Cocos Keeling Islands in Australia, and plastic from as far away as Norway has been washed up on this beach. And the locals try and clean it up. It's a very small community there. The locals try and clean it up, but the next day it just looks like this again. So actually now what's happening is organizations like Sea Shepherd and others are going out to the Cocos Keeling Islands and using it as a case study. They're using it to educate people about plastic pollution, and they're using it to study how plastic travels around the world in these ocean currents. So it's heartbreaking to see. However, though, every place we went in every of the 50 places we went to, we also met legions of people who are fighting to make a difference, and we've included that in our book. So we, in each chapter, highlights a global issue, from the necessity of protecting remarkable ecosystems like coral reefs and mangroves, to sea turtle and shark conservation, to the importance of the high seas. We feature scientists, organizations that are striving to make a difference, and suggest ways that you can get involved. So these guys, for instance, this is a group of young men and women from Moria called the Coral Gardeners. So that's Moria in French Polynesia, who, when they were teens, they were surfing their local surf breaks and noticed that the surf breaks started changing. They weren't breaking the same way. So they dove down to have a look at why the surf breaks weren't happening the same way they were before. And they noticed that their reef was dying, and it was no longer creating the surf breaks they were used to. So just from that, these kids, and they were all teenagers, 15, 16-year-old kids, they decided to try and heal the reefs. So they taught themselves reef restoration techniques, and they were denied support by their government for a long time. That's changing now, luckily. But at the beginning, the government didn't want to deal with them because they were only teenagers. So they approached the local hotels, and in French Polynesia, a lot of the hotels own the lagoons that they're built on. So the local hotels would allow them to replant coral in their lagoons. So by going around to all these luxury hotels and planting corals in the lagoons, they started creating a network of healthy coral reefs around the island. These guys now are pioneering reef replantation techniques. They've moved out of their parents' basements, and they've now got a staff and an office and all that kind of stuff. So they're really moving up. They're now in their 20s. But they've got people like Jason Momoa coming out and visiting them to see what they're doing. And they've harnessed social media, obviously, and are super inspiring to many, many people. It's absolutely amazing organization to follow along with. So yeah, follow them on Instagram and all the other things. They're the Coral Gardeners. Great group of kids.
So we're going to highlight 2 places in our book as an example of what we mean by all the information we're trying to put into these chapters. So we chose 2 Australian locations, one in the east and one in the west. because Australia is extraordinary in its variety and its diversity. In fact, it has the most locations in our book, 7 destinations, and that was seriously whittling it down. I'm going to talk about Cocos Keeling Islands, which Chris mentioned earlier with all of the plastic. So it's located 1,700 miles northwest of Perth on the western coast. So a little group of islands off the western coast of mainland Australia. There are twice weekly flights from Perth. If you do decide to go, and I really hope you do, travel tip, don't wait for any flight deals. The flight's underwritten by the Australian government and the price is what it is. So it's an Australian territory made up of 27 islands, 2 of which are inhabited, and it encircles a 6-mile wide horseshoe-shaped lagoon. So Cocos is home to a mix of expat mainland Australians and a group of Muslim Malay-speaking descendants of the original plantation workers, and it makes for a really unique culture. What is there to do here? Snorkel, cycle, swim, surf, paddle, and dive. And when the trade winds come through in June through October, it's a mecca for kite surfers as well. And then there's the weekly group golf game on a 9-hole course that also doubles as the airport runway. No skill except for trash talking is required. The area has a fascinating history. There's some really spicy World War I and World War II stories. And Australia's first naval victory occurred here. The history is well told in the local museum. You simply pick up the key from the local Shire office and self-tour yourself through. Divers can also see some of that history underwater. Diving wise, there are more than 30 local sites to choose from. They're all boat dives and one operator who has been doing this for a very long time. Cocos is located on the top of a large submerged seamount. Most of the dives are easy dives on sloping reefs. The coral's in pretty good shape, although it sustained some damage in recent storms. There's a ton of marine life here. There's dolphins, manta rays, hawksbill and green turtles, and the endemic yellow and indigo Cocos Keeling angelfish. There's even a local dugong that they named Cat. They believe Cat washed into the lagoon in a big storm. Cat loves it and has never left. This is the lunch stop, by the way. So diving is usually a full day, 2 dives around a surface interval on pretty as a picture direction island. The dive shop owner and guide is a man named Dieter, and he is surprisingly fastidious about lunches and insists on fresh fruits and salads, which the local hermit crabs are big fans of, and they love the leftovers. We also saw sharks on every dive: black-tip reef sharks, gray reef sharks, and white-tip reef sharks, all fat, zippy, and healthy. In 2022, Cocos Keeling Islands Marine Park was established. It covers an area of more than 180,000 square miles from the island shore extending out 200 miles. And the good news is that regular patrols by the Australian Border Force deters illegal fishing, which helps keep the area healthy. This is actually video from our very last dive of the trip. We had an 18 shark send-off, which made Chris very, very happy.
I always get super excited when I see lots of sharks. Love it. Can't think of anything better than be surrounded by sharks when I'm diving now. So
The bad news, some of which we've already touched on, is the plastic issue. So during one cleanup, researchers collected more than 414 million pieces of plastic from the beaches. Cocos is also under serious threat from rising sea levels and increasingly strong storms. The island's highest point is only 30 feet above sea level. And now the Australian Defence Force has its eye on Cocos as a remote base. It has plans to spend $500 million on infrastructure upgrades that are already wreaking havoc on the fragile ecology of the lagoon, decimating seagrass beds that are essential to marine life like turtles. What can we do about things like this? Well, the long and the short of it is that we, as a human species, need to decide what our priorities are, and it's not easy. We need defense, we need gas, we need minerals, but we also need biodiversity and pollinators and nature in balance. This is our shared life support system, and it's pretty important. From this aerial shot here of Cocos, you can see how fragile it really is. Like the Great Barrier Reef, it's really delicate place where everything is just in balance. It's already fighting battles on multiple fronts, and it's not invincible. But like we said, there are things we can do. The great thing is that all you need to do is to get involved and learn more, ask questions, explore, attend events like these. Learn about the ocean as much as you can, even if you're a diver or even if you're a non-diver. We all have a voice, and we all have also one of three things that we can use: time, money, or expertise. And we can put these to good use both when we're at home or when we're traveling. There's so many ways to get involved. And one of the best ways to get involved is to actually go visit these places, see them for yourself, see these creatures for yourself. It makes a big difference for your level of involvement. And if the ocean is valued, it will be protected. Dive travel places an economic value on the ocean and its species. Tourism, as we know, is a really complex balancing act, but it remains the only juggernaut powerful enough to challenge unsustainable extractive practices like mining, logging, and overfishing. No one is shark finning or dynamite fishing for fun. It's to feed families or to fill a demand, and usually not one created locally. If there is another way to make a living, for example, in the dive industry or ecotourism, most people would consider it. This video is taken in the Bahamas. These are Caribbean reef sharks. And over the past 50 years, oceanic shark and ray populations have absolutely collapsed. They've declined by 70%. In 2011, the Bahamas created a shark sanctuary and banned commercial shark fishing. Now nearly half of the divers visiting the Bahamas come specifically to see sharks, and shark tourism generates about $113 million annually.
Yeah, so we'll switch some gears now, a little bit closer to home for us. So I'm going to talk about where Carrie and I currently live, which is Byron Bay. This is our local dive site, and it's a pretty special place. It's the most easterly point of the Australian mainland. So it's, yeah, right over on the east coast. It's just about 2 hours south of Brisbane if you were wanting to come here. There's so much going on here, from cultural experiences to great music and art and fantastic eateries. Like, this is the best ice cream in the world, I reckon. It's absolutely amazing. But there's also no shortage of hikes. We're right on the doorstep of the Gondwana rainforest, a World Heritage Area that contains the most extensive areas of subtropical rainforest in the world. This place still contains ancient and primitive plants and animals from which life on Earth evolved. So spectacular rainforest just outside. See kangaroos, koalas, all those kinds of things as well when you go for walks there. Brilliant. And then there's the ocean: whale watching, surfing, kayaking, snorkeling, and diving. So the dive site is called Nothing Gully Julian Rocks. It's located about a 10-minute boat ride from the main beaches of Byron. And you can see in this video, you can see the mainland in the background. Yeah, and we've just, in this video, we've just landed ourselves in what's known as whale jail. So when you get too close to the whales with the boat, so what happened here is we just finished our dive and we were about to go back to the beach, and then four whales popped up right next to our boat, and they stayed with us for, actually, I think it was about 20 minutes or so. They stayed and hung around the boat. And while they're right next to the boat, you're not allowed to start the engine. You're not allowed to move. So that's why they call it whale jail. And we hated every single minute of it. No, just kidding. It was absolutely amazing. So it's really common to see whales from the boat when you go out to the dive site, or during winter, during the winter months down here. It's not common for them to come up this close to the boat, and every now and then occasionally people do see them on dives, but that's also not very common. But this was just absolutely incredible, an incredible moment for us.
You do hear them when you're diving.
You do hear them, yes. They're very loud underwater, which is amazing. Julian Rocks is oh, sorry, we've got a problem with one of our videos. Just bear with us there for a second. Why is this not playing? Sorry, this video is not playing. I think we'll just have to skip past that one in a moment. Julian Rocks is, actually, hang on a second. I'll just restart this thing. Sorry to do that. Let's just restart the presentation. I think I can get it to work again. And we'll go down to, where were we? That one. There we go. That's better. Let me just swap these around again. Okay. Sorry, something's not working with this video very well. There we go. Now it's a bit better. So Julian Rocks is consistently one of the best dive sites in the world. It's not very well known. Even for most Australians, it's not well known. There's a few reasons it's so special. First, Julian Rocks is located in the East Australian Current because it's the most easterly point of Australia. So any migrating animal will stop by for a visit, and more than 1,000 marine species call this place either home or come by and visit. That also means that despite it being a really, really small dive site, there's actually only 2 different dives you can do pretty much there. Even being that small and that limited, there's still always something amazing to see. So there's so many fish and other things. In the winter, there's dozens of grey nurse sharks. These sharks here, which you guys call sand tiger sharks, we call them grey nurse. And then you see the humpback whales on the surface. In summer, you get manta rays and you get the leopard sharks with what we call leopard sharks. You guys call them zebra sharks. So it's sand tiger and zebra sharks depending on the year and depending on the time of year, and also manta rays. Incredible. And then year round, you get the wobbegong sharks, which are the carpet sharks, which I'm sure the lady who went to Papua New Guinea saw plenty of those up there as well. But we get a lot of those wobbegong sharks down here too. So you typically see maybe on a good clear day, like in that video, you'd probably see 100 wobbegong sharks. That's no hyperbole. You'd actually see 100 wobbegong sharks. And then there's turtles, 3 species: hawksbill, loggerhead, and green turtles. There's mulloway, kingfish, snapper, grouper, eagle rays, and so much more. It's just an incredible place. This has been a marine protected area since 1982, and that shows. You rarely see large schools of large fish like this anywhere else, and especially this close to shore. So really, really good. Carrie and I have an interesting history with Julian Rocks. We both did our very first dives here.
I did a DSD here in 1995 when I was studying in Australia. I remember a carpet of wobbegong sharks and a turtle eating a jellyfish in what seemed like midair. And I also just did my 100th dive here just last weekend.
Congratulations to that. I did my open water course here in 2010. And the very first animal I saw on the very first dive was a grey nurse shark like this, so a sand tiger shark. And from that moment, I was just hooked on diving. It was like, this is how I want to spend the rest of my life. And diving is one of the main reasons why we moved back to this area. When I was guiding Julian Rocks, one of my favorite things to do was introduce people to sharks. I could guarantee them they'd see a shark on the dive, at least a wobbegong. And their eyes would get really wide, and then we'd all share the water with either a leopard shark, a wobbegong, or a grey nurse, which are really impressive looking sharks for any of you who've ever seen a sand tiger. And people just come out of the water buzzing, and they're all excited about it, and they still are. And it's just, that's the most fun thing I can think of. There's only one shop in Byron Bay. There's another one just outside of it that dives the site, so only 2 shops. Sundive, the shop that I learned at and who we regularly dive with in Byron Bay, has been operating since 1988, so quite a long time now. And if you do make the trip down to Australia, you do need to book online and book early. They do run out of spots on the dive boats. They run anywhere from between 1 to 3 dives per day, depending, with up to 2 boats. So yeah, there are quite a few spaces, but they're small boats because they're beach launch. So there's not a ton of space, so do book early. Because of where it's located as well, the conditions vary. So it's actually a really, really good dive spot to learn to dive or to improve your skills if you're diving it regularly, because the conditions change all the time. It can be great visibility, like obviously in these videos. It can be flat calm, it can be strong current, it can be low visibility. So it's a very mixed bag. Generally, whenever they can go diving, whenever it's calm enough to go out, the dive will be spectacular and you will see a lot of things. So even low visibility is not too bad. Probably 10-15 feet is the lowest that they dive in anyway. But it also means that the marine life comes out and there's always new marine life to see, and it's never a boring dive. So amazing site. So yes, thank you very much for having us this evening, and I do apologize about that little mishap there. Hopefully it didn't spoil it too much. And And yeah, if you don't mind, we'd love to have you follow us on social media. Our social media tags are Beneath the Surface Media. You can go onto our website, beneaththesurface.media. And if you do happen to, or if you would like to get the book, it's available on Amazon and most booksellers have it. And if you don't mind, if you do get the book, we would really, really appreciate a review on Amazon. Those reviews help us out massively with the book. So thank you very much. And yeah, we're happy to answer any questions. So I'll just change this around so that we can see you guys again properly. So, oh, was I
in the room?
Stop sharing? There we go.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Mikhail, and I was just wondering, obviously the two of you are traveling together. Do you have any thoughts about either solo travel or group travel and how that may or may not differ from your own experiences?
Sure, I can take that one.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's a very good question. I'm actually a huge advocate for solo travel. I didn't meet Chris until I was, I think, about 38. So all of my Nat Geo assignments and all of the travel that I did up until that point was pretty much solo travel. So I am a huge advocate for it, and I try to highlight places in the book that are also good for solo travelers. Because again, that's an area that I think is often left out. So for example, the Caribbean island of Saba is a really, really great place for solo travelers because it's a very kind of communal kind of space where it's easy to meet people and easy to engage, as well as go off and do your own activities. As far as group travel, big fan of group travel as well, provided that you can keep your independence to some degree. I think a lot of group travel, and especially a lot of group dive travel, focuses on diving, surface interval, diving, after dive cocktails, and you don't really get out to experience the community. You don't get out to have some of these kind of land excursions and self-exploration. So that's obviously very limited on liveaboards, but I think as long as you leave yourself some independence to go off and do your own exploring, nothing wrong with a little group travel. You meet some amazing people.
You do. I find, yeah, as a solo traveler as well, divers tend to be quite a social bunch. So if you go to a dive resort or to a place where there's other divers, or even when you go out diving on the dive boats, you tend to meet other people and chat, and then you might go out for a beer afterwards. So that tends to work quite well. The other thing that Carrie sort of touched on that is really, really important, that we found super important when we were traveling, is definitely go out into the local communities and let the local community know that you are there because of diving. Because a lot of the time, many people in the local community don't have an understanding of how much money the dive industry can actually bring to their local community. And once they realize that there's lots of people prepared to spend money in their community to visit their local dive sites and everything, they will appreciate, hey, we need to protect this local dive site so people keep coming. So it's
helpful.
It's very, very helpful.
The great insights. Thank you for sharing that.
Come on up. We have a question here.
Just get close to the microphone. Does your book identify or provide guidance on how to identify dive services providers that are good providers, and also dive services providers and hostelries that use and contribute to the local economy?
Yeah, so the ones that we used, thank you very much for the question, first of all. That's a great question. The ones that we used, for the most part, were, that was exactly one of the criteria when choosing dive operators. So in some places, there's only one dive operator, so you don't really have a choice. So one of the criteria was for us to try and find dive operators that are giving back to the community. So you'll see when we write about the dive operators, there is that information in the book in a lot of cases. The other thing is, it is very, very hard, especially for new divers who are inexperienced, to find dive operators in a place. Let's take Mexico as a good example. in places like Cozumel and Tulum and places where there are so many dive operators. It's really hard if you just turn up there as a new diver to know, well, is this a good operator? Is this a good operator? And look, there's no universal questions that you can always ask. My thing is, there's a gut feeling to it. If you walk into a dive shop and you see that their gear is ridiculously run down and dilapidated and things like that, their rental gear, then you can probably assume that they're not very serious on the safety aspects of anything that they do. And so that's maybe one of those triggers where you want to say, well, do I actually really want to be diving with these guys? If they don't take care of their gear, what else are they skimping on? You know, so it's one of those things. But it is hard as a new diver, especially when you don't have that experience, to walk in somewhere and say, hey, I want to go diving. Every dive shop's going to say, yeah, that's no problem, we'll take you diving. And you have to have a little bit of faith. As a new diver, I would recommend try and find some more experienced divers and just ask people if they've been there. Look at online dive forums. They are often very good with dive information and people sharing. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that I would look for. And then Carrie, I think, has something else.
So we include that in the new diver resources section of the book. We kind of include we elaborate on that to some degree about what divers should look for if they go into a shop, as Chris mentioned. It's not just the quality of the gear, but is in the gear disarray? Do they have time to pay attention to you and to answer your questions, or do they kind of give you the brush off? That sort of thing. So we do include some questions to ask and some things to look for. The greenwashing and ecotourism thing is a lot harder to get your head around. And that takes practice, knowing what to look for. A lot of times the companies that are overstating their credentials will kind of blast you with words like environmental and sustainable and eco, but do they actually have the accreditations to back that up? Are they, you know, there are certain like accreditations accommodation can get and dive shops can get to kind of certify that they are in fact walking the talk. Do they talk about their initiatives? Are they trying to make a difference? Nobody has got it right. Nobody's doing it 100%, but are they trying? Are they trying to take those steps? And again, not to use this as a self-promotion thing, but also look for travel guides that you trust. So for example, Chris and I did a lot of research on this book. So we went out there and we went to all of the places and we asked the questions and we did our research, and dive shops change hands and things happen between when we were there and publication, but we're doing the best we can to provide this information for you. So if you find people that you trust to be your guide, that's very helpful as well.
Very good. Any other questions? Carrie, Chris, we'd like to thank you very much.
I think there's one question on the chat.
Chris and Carrie, my name is Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, I'm an advanced water diver, and I am headed to the Maldives in mid-March.
Nice.
Have you been there, and can you tell me about your experience?
We haven't been to the Maldives. For our book, we chose the Seychelles, which is a very similar sort of dive destination. And because there's a lot, I mean, we went to 50 places. That sounds like a lot, but there's hundreds and hundreds of good places in the world, and we could have gone to all of them, but we had to whittle it down. So we tried not to choose too many destinations that were too similar. So we tried to have a more varied spread. And because the Maldives and the Seychelles are relatively close to each other and very similar as a destination, we didn't include both of them. That being said, whereabouts in the Maldives are you going?
I am on the Aggressor. So,
okay.
Yeah, dive boat, 16 days.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I know a lot of people who've been to the Maldives, and who one of our friends who dives here goes regularly to dive with tiger sharks over there, and he is absolutely he absolutely loves it, and he says absolutely spectacular over there. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun. It seems like a great dive location.
I can't wait to get your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Anybody else? Yeah. So we'd like to thank you for all the great information. And also would like to invite you, we have a trip to Beaufort every month from May to September on the fourth weekend. So Mary Lou runs our trip. We have some great videos and pictures of all the sharks we've seen.
So if you'd like to see sand tigers in massive numbers, we can hook you up.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
absolutely
Thank you
amazing. Yeah,
very
when
much.
we're back in the area, we'll hit you up.
Very good. So let's give them a wonderful round of applause.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.